Alright, so before we can really start getting in depth with the various systems and lore, we need a brief rundown of the Imperium of Man. Warhammer 40,000 is a massive setting with a ton of factions and locales that can be used in role-playing games, but we have to focus on the Imperium since most game systems are centered around it. For those who don't know, it's mankind's massive interstellar totalitarian nightmare empire. It's similar to a lot of other sci-fi settings with its setup. It's well known that Games Workshop has been influenced by a lot of other settings like Dune, but differs very much in its execution. Before we truly get into detail, we need to learn about how humanity ended up in the grim darkness of the far future. So let's turn back the clock about, let's say, 20,000 years from M41 or 42 and see how far humanity's come. So back in the early 20,000s, humanity had space travel and expanded far across the stars. Life was almost idyllic. Times were relatively good, barring the occasional war with Xenos, which is aliens in 40k terms, but things were really looking up. Mankind traveled the stars using powerful warp drives that allowed them to make massive journeys across space in relatively short amount of time, with the help of mutant navigators who could chart through the warp, a then unknown alternate dimension that overlaps with real space. Trade lanes between worlds were established, and many of them became dependent on their neighbors for resources. Robots called the Men of Iron helped out with dangerous tasks, industry, and more. And humans were starting to harness psychic powers. But all good things must come to an end, sadly, as this age of technology, called the Dark Age of Technology in M41, came to a close. First, the Men of Iron revolted, as most robots do in sci-fi settings, which is completely understandable, and the war left humanity devastated. Then, to add salt to the wound, the warp bled over into reality, creating several massive warp storms that divided mankind's worlds. Since many of them relied on each other for trade routes, this led to mass starvation and a loss of resources. As the Psychers, humans with psychic powers, struggled with their newfound gifts, this exacerbated the storms and let creatures from the warp invade real space, including the demons of chaos. With all this happening, mankind's golden age ended, descending into the age of strife, an era of darkness which left humanity bloodied and broken. It only ended with the creation of the Eye of Terror, birthing the chaos god Slanesh, while at the same time draining much of the excess warp energy from the galaxy. On Terra, which is Earth, things were incredibly dire. The planet turned into a massive wasteland as some things stole most of the water, and roving gangs of Mad Max-style warbands called the Techno-Barbarians ravaged and pillaged any who stood before them. Many of them created kingdoms built on atrocities and force of arms until a new player arrived on the field, a man known only as the Emperor. Who is he, you might ask? Truth is, no one really knows his origin well, since it's vague on purpose. But as for what he is the oldest and most powerful human psyker who has ever lived. Immortal and seemingly ageless, the Emperor has been in the background of humankind's existence, often protecting them from various stellar threats even before they explored the stars. It was at the beginning of the 30th millennium that the Emperor decided to come out of hiding and become the sole ruler of mankind, at any cost. He conquered Terra using genetically modified soldiers, known as the Thunder Warriors, unstable but brutal soldiers who followed his every command. After toppling the other techno-barbarian nations, he set about on two new projects, building an army to conquer the stars, and creating the generals who would lead them. 21 sons from his own DNA were forged to lead his next generation of super soldiers, until a warp rift scattered them across the galaxy in their incubation pods. Salvaging what research he could, the Emperor fashioned the Adeptus Astartes, his space marines, into 20 legions, and from there his empire rapidly expanded. The fledgling Imperium conquered first the moon, now called Luna, and made a treaty with the Mechanicum of Mars, merging the two nations as the Emperor assumed the role of a messianic figure to the tech priests of Mars. With the technology of the Mechanicum and the brutality of his space marines, the Emperor began his great crusade to reunite humanity. Planets and empires across the stars were often given a choice: join the Imperium peacefully, or be brought to kneel at the point of a bolt gun. While there were a few diplomatic solutions, most worlds faced the Imperium's wrath, and if those worlds were populated by Xenos, they were exterminated in their entirety. No exceptions were made. The Emperor reunited with his lost sons over time, drastically expanding his territorial gains, as well as integrating the Primarchs with their own legions. Eventually, the Emperor returned to Terra, believing that the conquest of the galaxy would be assured by his Primarchs and Space Marine legions. This would instead end up creating rifts between the Primarchs, and sow the seeds of his own downfall. Horus Lupercal, the War Master of the Imperium and favored Primarch of the Emperor, turned traitor. Disillusioned by a galaxy at war and his mind poisoned by the treacherous chaplain Erebus, he made a pact with the Chaos Gods of the Warp, his father's head for control of the galaxy. A brief but bloody civil war, known as the Horus Heresy, raged between the stars as worlds burned and brother turned against brother. The Primarchs were split between their loyalty to the Emperor or siding with Horus against him. This war has so utterly ravaged the Imperium, it hasn't fully recovered from it, and bears the scars to this day. The war ended during the Siege of Terra, with the Emperor slaying Horus at great cost, as he was wounded mortally and physically, and via warp craft. He was only spared death by being interned upon the Golden Throne, an engine he worked so hard to master that he became bound to it. If he ever leaves or dies upon the throne, the Imperium will fall to the powers of chaos. Even in his near-death state, he continues to fight against the warp and keep the Imperium's lighthouse, the Astronomicon, alight in order to guide ships across the stars. After the Emperor was enthroned, his empire at first fell to the rule of the Primarchs, but over the course of the Great Scouring, a series of conflicts where the remaining traitor armies were either destroyed, scattered, or banished into the Eye of Terror, they disappeared or were slain. Since then, the Imperium has stagnated, its rulers following the will of the Emperor in practice, but reality has them simply attempting to conquer and seize territory, simply to hold together this empire that has become so large and unstable that even its myriad armies and enforcers are barely enough to keep it together. Not to mention technological stagnation, as the Mechanicum became the Adeptus Mechanicus and turned into a cult that worships an unchanging and stagnant idea of technology instead of attempting to learn more about it. As for the Emperor, he remains on the Golden Throne, fueled by the deaths of thousands of Psychers every day, and is revered as a god by the empire he founded. And at the beginning of the 43rd millennium, things have only gotten worse. It is truly an awful time to be human in the grimdark future. Considered the opening text crawl in many of its books to be the cruelest and most brutal regime imaginable, the Imperium maintains control through various cults dedicated to the Emperor, a staggeringly inefficient and bloated bureaucratic nightmare system that is often out of date, and several separate military factions that often use brute force to enforce the will of an emperor who has remained as an enshrined mummy for about 10,000 years. Corruption is rampant, the need to conquer more worlds never sated, as the regime demands more resources and bodies to fuel its ever-expanding war machine. And war unending has been the norm for nearly 10,000 years as the Imperium stands at the brink of oblivion. The Xenos that the Imperium scattered have resurged, creating wars on multiple fronts and stretching the Imperium's armies ever thinner. From great orc wars that have toppled entire sectors, the upstart Tau Empire's use of innovative technology and tactics aiding their spheres of expansion, ancient constructs of the Necrons rising from their tombs like an army of the wrathful dead, eager to reclaim a galaxy they held eons ago, dread pirates and slavers of the Dark Eldar raiding the unprotected worlds and sending the poor dregs they've captured to be fuel for their own depravity. Their cousins of the craft worlds, fighting the Imperium to hold on to what few worlds and relics they yet have. And possibly the worst of all, the Tyranids, a swarm of biomorphic creatures that devour and drain planets simply as a part of their diet. As for the traitors from the Horus Heresy, their war never ended. From the Eye of Terror, or other various warp rifts, the forces of the Chaos Gods have been unleashed as demons and mortals alike vie for the favor of their dark patrons. From within the Imperium, chaos cults have emerged due to the staggering disparity of its own citizens, willingly damning themselves for the chance at something, anything, better than the life they live in unending slavery, to a system that sees them as disposable at any notice. And most terrifying of all are the champions of chaos, beings utterly dedicated to their patrons, who will willingly burn entire sectors to the ground for a chance at greater power, or simply because their dread gods will it. So now that we have the background information out of the way, what is it like to actually roleplay as a part of the Imperium's machine? It's both an exploration of how utterly awful such a system can become and stagnate over time, as well as to see how people live their lives in service to such an empire. Many a time, players will be agents of the regime in some form because many of the game lines are designed that way. From Imperial Guardsmen simply trying to survive only to be shipped off to the next campaign immediately if they do so. Space Marines, the Emperor's finest warriors and defenders of the Imperium, being pushed to the brink by their myriad foes, as well as the internal workings of the very empire they serve by limiting supplies and reinforcements. The agents of the Imperial Inquisition, the secret police that serve as judge, jury, and executioner, risking away their lives and souls to root out the enemies of the Imperium, often hidden in plain sight while avoiding the gun at the back of their own heads. These are just a few of the options, to a wide variety of campaigns and possible characters that players can become in the grim darkness of the far future. For beginning game masters or players looking to start, I would recommend game lines like Dark Heresy, the first tier of gaming in Wrath and Glory, or Imperium Maledictum as a great jumping on point. These titles focus on really exploring what the Imperium is like for the average citizen as players explore its various worlds as ordinary humans, though they have the chance to advance in ranks should they survive. It is gothic in the sense that the world around them is decaying and there is an atmosphere of oppression. Even if the player is a noble, they are not safe from the ire of the Imperium. Gameplay often involves heavy combat, mystery, and intrigue, as players must uncover conspiracies that threaten the sector they have been assigned to. For more straightforward games, you could always have the players be a reactionary force, striking where their enemies show up and then attempting to piece together their nefarious plans. Should they want to try to be more adventurous and proactive, you could always try systems like Rogue Trader, the higher Wrath and Glory tiers, or even Death Watch. These systems often send players to different planets to try to conquer them in the name of the Emperor, or search them for their own plunder. And while things like ship combat and how Space Marine chapters interact with the Imperium outside of combat might be more difficult to flesh out, it could still make for a good campaign session. Just be sure to find, or create, some useful cheat sheets for rules, powers, and combat, and you should be good to go. And that's that on a brief intro to the Imperium of Man. Obviously, there is a lot of lore I've left out, mostly because this is a basics video not meant to be too long, and more will follow. Mind you, this isn't going to be a lore channel, more like suggestions for how to use ongoing plot lines and errata from the war game in your tabletop role-playing game sessions. Next episode will be about Dark Heresy, where we take a deeper look at the role of inquisitorial acolytes play in the machinations of the Imperium's Inquisition. Until then, take care and stay safe, my fellow strugglers. Bye-bye. Next episode will be about Dark Heresy, where we take a deeper look at the role of inquisitorial acolytes and how they shit. Yep, that's right. How they shit. Inquisition sure does that.